Good evening, morning, and or afternoon, Tumblr. This is Iambic Deary, and I think I've recovered as much as I can from my finale feelings, although we'll see about that. They're still there, no question about that. Anyway, I would like to present another first author for me, Marchioness of Blackadder, lovely lady that she is, has given me permission to read the following. Now, it might run a bit long, so I'm probably going to end up breaking it up into two, but we shall see. In any case, style of play. Usually he could expect a bruise now and then around her dodgy elbows, perhaps even a bandage on her palm or fingers from wielding the kitchen knives. But when his little caretaker returned that evening, armed with a basket full of fresh gold straw, missing a tuft of her hair along the base of her skull and sporting a bloody split lip, he knew she hadn't had an ordinary accident. "Why didn't you call for me?" Rumpelstiltskin was good at many things, but containing his temper wasn't one of them. It laced his voice, normally lilted and mocking. It was low and rough. Belle set the basket of straw by the wheel and walked over to him, wincing and touching the back of her head. Rumpelstiltskin flinched at her face, the blood trailing down her blameless skin. With the twittering of his hands, he ushered Belle to sit atop the long hall table. She sighed softly, cupping her hand to her mouth. Rumpelstiltskin swatted her hand down, glaring. "Don't touch it." "But it's dripping on my bodice. Do as I say." Belle huffed, wiggling in displeasure, but did as he said. Rumpelstiltskin pulled a handkerchief out of his vest and cupped the girl's chin in his claw, lifting her face up as he stepped closer, her knees pressing against his legs. He was careful and precise as he pressed the cloth to the angry, torn skin. Scarlet bloomed in the white fabric, and he felt her breath clench in her chest. A soft giggle broke from his lips, and Belle pursed her mouth against his fingers, her eyes dancing. "Stop," she whispered through her teeth, her voice wavering in her giggle. "If you make me laugh, it'll only make it worse." Rumpelstiltskin sniggered, pressing the handkerchief just a bit tighter to her lip to stop the bleeding. Her lashes fluttered, pressing closed. He took the moment to examine her face for any more bruises or cuts. Her jaw seemed to be swelling a bit, but nothing he couldn't fix. By the time she opened her periwinkle eyes, he'd procured an astringent, a salve, and a compress. He donned his half-moon spectacles and peered closer at her face. "I dare say you didn't take a simple tumble," he finally said after a moment, taking her hand and putting it to the cloth for her to hold while he mixed the medicine. He could feel her watching him as she did. She sighed softly. "No, I didn't," Belle mumbled behind the cloth. "I was stopped by a highwayman. He let me keep the straw, but the food and gold I had left over is gone." Rumpelstiltskin looked at her sharply, narrowing his eyes. "I take it he's the one who hit you?" Belle nodded, curious of his reaction. He didn't look very upset, but he noticed he was taking more care than normal with his movements. She paused. "It could be worse." "Indeed. Move that bit of cloth," he huffed, his hands tender as he applied the astringent to her wound. Belle squealed in pain, pulling back while simultaneously reflexively sending her high-heeled shoe slamming into Rumpelstiltskin's leather-clad thigh. The dark one grunted before falling onto the floor, the handkerchief left to flutter down onto the rug beside him. "Seven fucking hells! I'm so sorry!" Belle cried, dropping off the table to help him up. He growled, jerking his hands from her as he stood up before pushing her back against the table. He glared at her for a long moment, receiving a meek, apologetic wince from the girl. "Just hold still," he muttered, dusting himself off and trying to ignore the throbbing pain in his leg. If he were still his human self with his useless knee, he probably would have had to amputate it. Lucky for her, the only punishment he would be delving would be her getting slippers, or she'd walk barefoot, cold floors be damned. He took up the astringent again and gently pressed it to her lip. Belle made a noise, high-pitched and up in the octaves that would shatter glass, but she kept herself in check and did not move. After that, he applied the salve, smiling slightly as he watched the angry skin cool into flawless porcelain, the tear in her plump lip mending itself until there was only a thin, pale line near the corner of her mouth. "There we are." Belle reached up and touched her mouth tentatively, as if testing out her smile. "Much better." Next was her hair. There was a bloody patch where some had been torn out, probably from when she attempted to run. Yes, they always catch you, don't they? He tilted her head down so her brow pressed to his chest, stepping between her knees as he inspected the raw skin at the base of her skull. He felt her flinch when he parted her hair and murmured, "I'm sorry. Just a minute more." He took up the salve again and dotted it along the skin, felt her purr against his chest and shiver. He smiled when he was done, satisfied that her hair would grow overnight, much like the princess in the towers had so long ago. Stepping back, Rumpelstiltskin eyed her skeptically for a moment longer, feeling a bruise forming already on his leg. She had some strength, it seemed. "Belle," he said curiously, "take my hands." His little caretaker was cleaning up the medicine when she glanced up, surprised. "I beg your pardon?" she asked ever so politely. "Take my hands." Belle hesitated, as if she was trying to understand him in another language, or prepare for one of his jokes that she never quite found as funny as he did, when she was the object of them, at least. She stepped close and gently slid her palms over his claws. He noticed her pale throat hollow when she swallowed, glancing up at him under her lashes. "Yes." "Squeeze. As hard as you can." Belle did as she was bid, and he knew she wasn't just simply obeying. She seemed to trust him in everything he asked of her, which endeared her strangely in an unfamiliar way. The strength of her grip was lacking sorely, though, and she was trying to squeeze his hands so hard that she shook. He rolled his eyes at her attempt. More kitten than lioness, he thought. "Yes, yes," he sighed, dropping his hands like birds flittering away. "Well, we'll work on that, I suppose. Meet me in the garden tomorrow afternoon, once your chores are done." Belle blinked. Whatever for? Rumpelstiltskin ignored the question. He was already planning, and the less she knew about it was probably for his advantage. "Dress comfortably," he called over his shoulder, leaving her with the medicine, a basket of straw, and a healed smile. The early spring morning was still touched by winter, but with the sun winking over the mountains, the garden's chill was reduced to comfortable warmth with a cool breeze, slightly wet from the still melting snow in some areas of the woods. Rumpelstiltskin heard the soft-shoed feet approach from behind and smirked as he unrolled the brown parcel he'd uncovered from one of his collection rooms. He hadn't touched them in so long. A few of the items were spotted and badly needed polishing. Belle came up beside him and gasped with delight. He glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she looked up to him. "Are you going to teach me?" Ever the student was his little girl. He took in her appearance, dressed in slim, fitted gray pants, a cornflower blue tunic, and black bodice. Her boots laced under her knees, rabbit skin. He nodded in approval. "Indeed." "They're so thin," she said. "Why, wouldn't a thicker blade be better?" "It depends on the swordsman," he said, pausing. "Or woman. And these are foils, dearie. You're a princess. I'm sure you've seen them at court many a time." "I have. But I've always wondered, why are they so thin?" "Because a clunky broadsword would rip your pretty gown to shreds in a dance," Rumpelstiltskin informed her, holding on to the image of Belle in tatters. He pushed the warmth he felt in his throat back down. "That's the only reason." "The most important one. Now stop disturbing me." Belle, bouncing on her heels, and went to grab one of the foils. Rumpelstiltskin promptly swatted her arm away, causing his caretaker to squeak and yank her hand back with a pout. "This isn't a toy," he said with hard eyes, frowning. He tilted his hand at her, taking note of her healed lip and the swelling that had gone down overnight. "Show me your hand." The girl held out her hand, palm up. "Petite," he thought wistfully. He glanced down at his parcel before he picked the right weight for her, examining the tip and grip. The foil was perfect, unbent and strong, but lightweight enough that she would be able to handle it, weak arms or not. The grip was almost too small for him, so he was sure she'd end up keeping it when they were done. Belle watched him curiously with wide, periwinkle eyes, saw the sun glinting off the steel. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It should be," he scoffed. "Plucked it off a pirate captain." "A pirate captain?" "Indeed. She gave me quite a problem," he huffed. That had been a particularly annoying deal he'd gone through, still sporting the burned palms he'd earned. Honestly, whoever thought to light swords aflame was a complete idiot. "She?" Belle asked incredulously, and he knew he'd be telling a story tonight. But before she could press him further, another voice broke into the garden. "I don't like this one. It's not heavy enough." Rumpelstiltskin heard Belle grasp deep in her throat at their third party. Perhaps I should have mentioned him, he thought with an amused smirk, and suddenly glad he'd neglected the thought. Gaston rounded the hedge with a sour expression, stopping short when he saw his former fiancée at the dark one's side. The girl at his side was aghast. "What is he doing here?" she exclaimed, looking at Rumpelstiltskin for an expression. Her voice was laced with displeasure, as if they were being intruded upon, and he quite liked that image. He saw a bit of worry, but mostly astonished annoyance playing out on her face. It was one of his favorite looks on her. The dark one grinned, flashing teeth. "Well, dearie, you won't be using me for target practice. I like this shirt too much." "You're going to teach me how to fight against Gaston? That's hardly fair." Belle glared at him, crossing her arms. "He's twice my size." "Yes, and the highwayman who took you unawares last night was on horseback," Rumpelstiltskin told her patiently, his voice lilting in his delight at her distress. "I'm not going to chase away every predator who comes after you, dearie. I'm a very busy man, and I haven't got all day to mend your split lips. You're a grown woman, princess or not. You can take care of yourself." Belle was stunned, staring at him in complete awe. Clearly she hadn't been privy to such information before, or told elsewhere. If she wanted to be brave and show the world, and herself, what she could do, Rumpelstiltskin thought this was a step in the right direction. Gaston stepped closer, much the same since he'd last been seen. Of course, Rumpelstiltskin had made sure the fop had forgotten that he'd been turned into a flower, and perhaps a few other things, but Belle did need some practice, and what good was keeping a 6-foot-tall oaf, he'd lost about 5 inches from Belle's trimming, in a vase on one's dining-room table if no one could beat him about? It seemed perfectly logical to Rumpelstiltskin. "Gaston is a seasoned swordsman," Belle protested. She looked highly perturbed. Whether it was from seeing her former fiancé or from the prospect of having to fight him, Rumpelstiltskin wasn't sure, but both ideas made him quite happy to be up so early in the morning. "I'll never be able to beat him." "Of course you will," Rumpelstiltskin dismissed, and with the flat of his blade slapped Gaston in the arm with a hard, sharp force. "Heck!" Rumpelstiltskin giggled, knowing the slap would leave a sting for the rest of the week. "See? I assure you it's quite easy." Belle bit her lip, but he could see she was fighting against laughter. Good, he mused, though whether it was from her slowly accepting willingness to participate or from the idea of stabbing her fop, he wasn't sure. Either was preferable at this point. "That was unnecessary," Gaston said, frowning darkly, rubbing his arm. Rumpelstiltskin rolled his gilded eyes before leaning down into the parcel of foils. He drew a heavier one he never used because it was so incredibly bulky as far as foils went. He handed it to the man, who took it with an unenthusiastic turn of his mouth. "I'm much more talented in the way of the saber." "I'm much more talented in turning people into snails. Go back to killing my tree," Rumpelstiltskin snapped. "We will call for you when you are needed." Gaston glowered, but turned on his black-booted heel and disappeared behind the hedge again. It was just as well. He hated that apple tree. "Now, Belle." Rumpelstiltskin spun to face her, and the girl looked up pleasantly, a pretty smile dimpling her face. "Stance is more important than anything in a duel. Remember that." And so the lesson began. And part 2 will be up in approximately half an hour. Thank you for listening.